Think about it. Every hiring decision is a choice that can make or break a team, a culture, and even an entire company. So how do we make the right choice? Hi, I'm Dr. Mickey, and welcome to Inside the Mind of Hiring. Here we'll uncover the psychology and strategy behind effective hiring. Because the right fit isn't just about skill or experience. It's about understanding people, their motivations, their strengths, and the shadows of their shortcomings. Together, we'll tackle the tough questions. How do we look beyond bias? How do we find the qualities that make people not just qualified hires, but the right hires? This is about identifying leaders who drive success, lift morale, and actualize a company's vision. Inside the Mind of Hiring starts now.
Everyone, I'm Dr. Pat, and I get to do this show with the most incredible Dr. Mickey Fineberg. And out of the gate,
Wow.
This is going to be one of it. I'm telling you, this is like, I just shared with you before we were chit-chatting a conversation which I had with a friend of mine who is in the C-suite arena. So let me just tell everybody, today's episode is C-suite hiring. What to keep in mind. You know what? I want to change the title of that because after my conversation with a colleague of mine, I am just wondering how any company out there is successful hiring at the C-suite level without Dr. Mickey. I'm just wondering about this. And so let's talk about what this is today. First, we're going to kick it off. What the heck do we mean by C-suite? You know, I remember the first email I got from that I think it was from Jack Canfield, and he was doing a special C-suite thing. So you know me, right? This kid from the Bronx, Dr. Mickey.
Right.
I'm like, I didn't know Jack was in real estate. Okay, because that's what I thought C-suite meant. Like the guy had this special real estate option. See, that was my brain. Now, I have to say that wasn't yesterday. So let me just be clear. But the first time I heard the term, I'm like, what? What kind of C-suite package do you want me to buy for that amount of money?
Right. Well, you're talking about the Chiefs, Pat.
I'm talking about
the Chiefs of the company. You know,
is that what C stands for, Chiefs?
I
Great.
believe it
I
does.
love it.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with the football team, everyone. Let's just be very clear. That could be a whole show. As a matter of fact, I want to really go over this with you because we're talking about people that are hired to lead the company. Bottom line, that's the way I categorize it. And, you know, having been on some of these interviews myself and failing really unprecedentedly because I didn't have a Dr. Mickey and because, you know, there is a level of grooming and training that you need to have. But let's talk about it. We need to boost the record here. So here we are, we have a successful candidate hit rate. I don't even want to say it because I don't even understand this. From 40 to 60% success rate. Hello, that means 60-40 are unsuccessful. Yeah. How many dollars? Okay, so if we had more time, we'll have to do a show on this because I love quantifying things. You and I both do. I would love to know what the cost of that is. But today you're going to share how we go from 40 to 60 to over 85% or higher. How do we do that?
Right. That's what we're going to talk about today. Well, it's interesting. We reviewed a list of practices that was put out by a post by Search Labs, and we curated it. I kind of went over it, and I thought it made good sense. And so we'll talk about those elements and add a little value of to that today. How's that?
I'm all in.
Yeah. So yeah, the idea is to get the realistic hit rate to 85% or higher. And when you're talking about C-suite or the chief executives of the company, you're talking about major loss because you're talking about over 200% of base salary, not 200%. You're talking about a major portion. 2 times base salary. So, when you're talking about a senior executive, that's a lot of money that you can lose, both in terms of actual dollars and recruiting costs and training and onboarding and all that. But you can lose lose a lot in terms of productivity, morale, and customer satisfaction and missed opportunities. So you can lose a lot there. And we've talked about that in prior episodes. So it is, sometimes when I think about it, it's hard for me to fathom 200 over 200% of base salary. And you know what senior executives get paid. So that's a lot of money. So let's look at these practices. One of the first things listed is a thorough assessment. And I want to add psychological assessment. When you're evaluating these C-suite candidates, a thorough assessment by a third party, preferably a trained psychologist with a lot of experience, is important. So again, that combines an interview with well-selected instruments in order to select people that have the leadership attitudes and style, and of course, effectiveness. They have the ability, the effectiveness at thinking both tactically or organizationally and strategically, thinking in the gray areas, thinking ahead about how to improve and contribute to a successful enterprise that's growing. And it has to be a good culture fit. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But one thing, strategy is a little bit of a nebulous factor. And when I'm assessing somebody for strategy, I'm thinking about both their conceptual thinking ability, their conceptual intellect, which is really the can-do part of the puzzle of strategic thinking. I'm also thinking about the will-do, which are the personality factors that make someone more prone or less prone to think in a strategic way. So I'll give you an example of one candidate that we assessed. Was really sharp, superior actually, from an intellectual number on her capacity to think in terms of concepts, which relates directly to thinking strategically. And but what we found is, so she definitely had the can-do working for her. In terms of the will-do, we found that she was relatively conventional, not real imaginative. Not highly intellectually curious, and a little bit more needing of structure and predictability. So while the can-do was strong, the will-do was not. And we couldn't really endorse the candidate on that dimension of our evaluation. So, but psychological assessment as a component of this hiring process is so important because it gets to so many things that you can't see when you're interviewing candidate, reviewing your background. I mean, you can to an extent, but you really can't see some of the important nuances, particularly the shadows of their shortcomings. You just can't pick that up.
Right? I think it's really kind of cool we're talking about this too, because, having these conversations with my colleagues over the past couple of weeks, just about a number of different things, because we're getting ready to launch a business/leadership channel. And, I'm just getting, what do we call it in the business? I'm gathering data.
Right.
Okay. I already know what I think to do, but I like to ask people. But here's what I love about this is because you're right. You have to know the culture. Now, as an executive reporting directly to Charlie Brooks, the executive vice president of a premier Fortune 50 company, when they put, she does a great job, outstanding performance, but we think she lives on another planet. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the good news with that is that was actually a compliment. And what happened after that is I sat with my boss and I said, well, Charlie, I mean, that's not going to look good. He says, let me modify it. So what did he modify it to? I said, yes, I am from another planet sometimes, but look who I'm working for. He said, I'm going to change it. And so what did he change it to? We think she's from another planet and it's a perfect fit for working with the executive team at AT&T.
Right.
Now,
right.
But if you take that out of context and I go into a C-suite interview and I say, and somebody says to me, what is the funniest thing anybody ever said on your performance review? And I say that, I better be applying for Microsoft or Google, right? But what you're talking about is we need to have these checks. We need to be able to see where we are. And the assessment brings out things that, correct me if I'm wrong on this. it's almost like the invisible nature of someone. Is that like a bad term? I don't know how to describe it. Help me here.
Yeah. That's why I called
Invisible
it.
or something.
Yeah, you get what's in the spotlight, but you also get what's in the shadows.
That's it.
Yeah.
Can we pull that clip? Say that one more time. Because this is what the assessment does, right? And I didn't know
Right.
it like that. So what do you get out of the assessment? What have you seen?
Well, you illuminate issues that are not necessarily apparent from the experiences of the interview. For example, I mean, decisiveness is an important commodity for a C-suite executive. So we can pick up things, whether a person is too cautious about making critical decisions, too concerned about what people think, which may not be a great uh, component of being decisive. Okay. And so just on the decisiveness dimension, we can pick up stuff that's, like I said, it's in the shadows, but not apparent in terms of what you're seeing. Certainly we can pick up stylistic patterns in candidates that are maybe important. They're pretty good at putting on a magnanimous and positive image on things
Yeah.
and being cordial and stuff like that. But what we can find out that kind of lurking below the surface is a quick edge to be critical and intolerant. And we can pick up not only that, but the level of control that they might have over those tendencies. So it can be important on those dimensions. Those are two examples of that come to mind pretty easily. Um, yeah, and we can pick up on stuff of where well, kind of relates to decisiveness, but we can pick up on things that are they can they keep their mind on the big picture?
Yeah.
What's really
Yeah.
critical, or do they get immersed in
Mm.
unnecessary detail or things that are less relevant? So can they stay focused on the high return issues
Yeah.
is really important. And
I,
these are not things that you can generally pick up with through other sources, other evaluation sources.
And these assessments go across boundaries. Let me talk about this for a minute because they go across cultures, countries, cities. These are assessments that are tried and true. And, it's interesting that we may interview people or you may be hired to go to another country. I think that you have done some work in Brazil, like where my pop was born, right?
Right, right.
And so, how does it play out in other countries? Tell me what your experience was, in that assessment of that country director.
Oh, okay. Well, um, I find that executive traits that it's really the culture of that company in that country that you're really thinking about.
Yes.
And Brazil, things have a tendency to teeter on machismo is pretty important in a Latin country like that. So executives do have to take charge and be somewhat more decisive. And
Yeah. You should have
a
met my
country,
uncles. You should have
right?
met
Yeah,
my uncles. That's a
right,
perfect example. Very nice. Thank you.
right. So a country, a country of that nature, and a company in that country, which is a key division of this main company that's located here in the United States. But the way they operate in Brazil is maybe different. They're and it is culturally different than the way it operates in the
Hmm.
States. I mean, there's less of a tolerance for indecisiveness. There's less of a tolerance for heavy duty collaboration. They want the boss to, kind of consider what people think and be tuned into people emotionally and psychologically, but they want them to be decisive. They want them to be clear and direct about what they're thinking. And people kind of tend to respect that more and go along with that more. Here was an instance where I assessed two people for that job. One person I felt was clearly positive on that decisiveness and with a flavor of directness dimension. It was probably pretty good, but the more expensive candidate, clearly, probably, and I think the better hire.
Hmm.
The other candidate I actually didn't recommend because of lack of little wishy-washy on the decisiveness and being directive when it's important dimensions. And so I wasn't in favor of that candidate. And so uh, the the recruiter actually checked references, which is not what I recommend. I recommend that company principals check references, and references are important practice because they're wanted to discuss that. It's on the list. So the recruiter came back with the candidate that he didn't recommend for the reasons that I said. Came back with glowing comments, quote unquote, on the decisiveness and willing to stand up and be directive when it's important. And basically, the search firm person says, well, the psychologist got it wrong. Okay. Well, it turned out in this case, the psychologist got it right. But in terms of reference checking, I think sometimes it's best for the company principals, the principals on the hiring team to do that. I think there's a tendency to ask better questions to get better answers.
I agree with you completely. Having been on a hiring panel, having been on that firm, that basis, and also working with recruiters, of course, I had a situation like you. I didn't quite believe what the recruiter was saying, and I had to do the reference check myself. And what you find out is, I'm like, why? Okay, so did you do the reference check that I did? And what we find too, and this is going to help improve your hiring success. Executive search firms, recruiters, psychologists, assessments, they don't always work with the same intention in mind. Now, when you're hired, Dr. Mickey,
they have a different agenda. They have a different agenda.
I was trying to be diplomatic right there.
Yeah.
But they do, because why?
Well, because the search fees are pretty big, and they're bigger than what it's like psychological assessment of a candidate is not free, but it's a fraction of what typically what they're going to pay in a search firm fee particularly for a C-suite executive. I mean, that's the way it works. So there's going to be some natural biases, but don't get me wrong, recruiters are really important in the food chain.
I know.
I mean, they go out and parachute in and they find, God bless them, they source qualified candidates who are typically not necessarily looking for a job, who can be extremely talented. So in terms of surfacing talent and bringing it to, not just surfacing it, but bringing it to the table, search firms are very vital, and the recruiters involved in that in those activities are really important. But I do think you have to be careful about the bias that they can bring. So I talked about it in terms of potential for that happening in a reference check. But I've seen firms that do, it's usually larger firms, they will combine assessment with recruiting. And I think it's like the fox guarding the hen house. There's a little bit of a tendency to let bias take over in a situation like that. And I can only say it from my own experience. I at the time I offered assessment and recruitment in the same thing. Somebody else from my firm was doing the recruiting and I was doing the assessment, or I was even doing both. And you know what? I found very quickly that it biased me. I wasn't being objective in guiding the client on a given candidate. So I had to stop and look in the mirror and say, Mickey, you want to be a psychologist or a recruiter?
And what did you decide, Dr. Mickey?
Well, I decided to stay on as an assessor of candidates and to be a psychologist.
That's why people are born into this world, like Linda, one of our top executives here, my best friend, and watching her do massive recruitment for the once known Lucent company, and what she did with that. And clearly her level of detail and objectivity, you don't even want to be in the same conversation with her when it comes to recruiting. But you see, we can't help ourselves, though. I mean, as when those of us that are out there and we're doing jobs like this, you have to have a scale. It's not always going to be balanced, but you really need to tip the scale to have objectivity over here and subjectivity like lower.
Right, right. So going back to the reference checks,
Yeah.
um, it's really important to approach it. So I'm recommending the company principals do it, but I'm also recommending guerrilla referencing. Not
What is
just who
that?
that's when the candidate recommends somebody or asks you to talk to certain people, but you use those to leverage contacts or what you know about the organization. Find other people that the candidate didn't ask you to talk to.
Yeah, I've never
Because
been called a gorilla.
yeah, well, that's guerrilla
Pit
reference,
bull, but
right?
never a gorilla.
Yeah. And there's another element to referencing too, Dr. Pat. There are online 360 referencing programs that are really good because reference people giving references that do it on a computer and are guaranteed anonymity are going to be more objective than if they're going to talk to a person. So I find these programs to be really telling and often a good complement to what we do as psychologists,
Yeah.
in the referencing process. And yeah, and what I found is even when the candidate selects the references, they're surprisingly candid in ways maybe that the candidate wouldn't think they would be,
Yeah.
because they have the protection of the computer and they have the protection of anonymity. And I think it's a really good practice to include that
Yeah.
as an element, particularly for C-suite candidates.
Exactly. I want to just remind everyone where this is C-suite hiring. What we're talking about here is Dr. Mickey Feinberg is really saying, look, do you want to go from a 40% success rate to over 85%? And we've touched on so far in the show, psychological assessments, what they do. Of course, call Dr. Mickey, email Dr. Mickey, whatever you want to do. Then we touched upon this, but we'll probably get back to it. You must have a clear job description unless you're hiring for complete ambiguous type person. Then executive search firms, understand them, understand your dynamic, who's looking for what, who's making decisions. Are you getting enamored by the salesman or salesperson conversation? Then
Right.
the other thing we touched upon is a cultural fit. And I have a funny feeling we're going to do a whole show on that. The last thing
Yeah.
we talked about was reference checks. The other two in this 7-point solution is legal compliance and hedging against bad hires. Let's talk about these two in the final minutes we have left, because legal compliance, I don't even understand how to make sense of legal compliance anymore.
Well, you want to reduce risk of a lawsuit, so you want to comply with state and federal regulations in terms of what to do and what not to do when you're hiring people. I think the age is you can't ask a candidate their age, particularly if they're over 40. It's just not a good idea to do. But I think the main issue, I think it's important to comply with legal regulations. I think what's even more important, Dr. Pat, to avoid legal exposure is to be nice to candidates, to treat them with dignity, respect, honesty, a little cordiality doesn't hurt. Because when you come across that way, and that includes myself, when you come across that way to candidates, particularly around the selection decision, candidates are going to feel good about the fact that they went through it and they stood up to the plate and they swung the bat and they maybe didn't make it, but they're going to feel good about the client or the company that is recruiting and evaluating them. It's my policy to offer candidates an assessment feedback, whether or not they get the job. And I want to make them happy, well, not happy, but satisfied that they got information that might be important to them. Whether or not they got the job, and whether they or not they get the job, they only request the feedback 2 to 5% of the time. So they don't request it very much. But a lot of times when I'm giving feedback to a candidate, I discover they're really angry at the company that's recruiting them, because the company basically ghosted them after they made the decision. They had no idea that they were, they didn't know what was going on. And they felt, really disrespected and probably angry enough to test the situation from a legal perspective. But I do a lot of good work in terms of decompressing angry candidates at the client, because I want them to feel that they got something out of the feedback. And once they feel that, whatever anger or chagrin that they feel toward the hiring company for ignoring them, which should never happen, kind of goes away. It gets decompressed. So it kind of reduces the threat of any kind of legal action. But that's why you want to comply, because legal action can be expensive. You end up settling, and that's expensive, and you don't want to get into that. So that's important.
No, you really don't. I mean, what we're talking about here is one of the most important things, I think, right now as we move forward in the world, because this is going to be a make or break scenario for companies in the United States, hiring the right people at the top level. In the past, it may or may not have had an effect, but we're in different times now. We are in a sense of really moving forward. One of the last things that I want to just touch upon, I know we've got about a minute left, and I'd really like to spend more time in doing the show about hedge against bad hires. That's a very tricky. The bottom line is, how about we don't hire them in the first place, Dr.
Exactly. That was my point.
And oh my gosh!
And you want to have a good job description, because that's that kind of spells out the expectations of the role and everything, and it makes everything square and upfront and all that. When I'm testing people for jobs, I typically don't go just with the written job description. I talk to the major hiring managers to see what's on their mind, and I talk a lot. Culture should be evident in the job description. Because that's so important. I don't know if I said it, 75% of people that that don't make it in a senior job is because of style and attitude, and that relates directly to culture.
I know, we already talked about that, because I think that really was the demise of.
I don't know if I said that, but that's an important element.
But we
culture.
did, and we talked about it in another show, because it's always been, I could write a book on demystifying the hiring of Carly Fiorino, right?
Right.
But part of this too is we cannot afford this anymore. And the reason I say this is because companies now are so digitally driven into this world. It is a top level of competition, in a sense.
Right.
And the cost of a bad hire, we don't have the exact numbers because nobody will tell us. It is phenomenal. And a lot of times when you hire at C-suite and then you fire, you've got to pay them stuff. I mean, it's not like
no, it's not a good situation.
Joe. No.
Right.
Dr. Mickey, thank you for today. We've got lots more to talk about. The bar has
but you can put things in place like clear expectations and evaluations at key times, particularly early on, to cut your losses, but you want to try to avoid it in the first place. Really.
Yeah. So one of these next episodes, what happens if your hiring executive team asks you if it's okay to record the interview? Stay tuned for that one with Dr. Mickey Fineberg.
Okay.
Dr. Mickey, what's the best website? How do we?
Yeah.
No hidden cameras, people. How do we find out more about you? How do people contact you?
Thank you, Dr. Pat. There's 3 ways.
Okay.
DeltaConsultants.com or DeltaConsultants.com, or look me up on LinkedIn. That's Dr. Mickey Fineberg, Fineberg. And what's the other way? Oh, just email me at Mickey, Mickey, at DeltaConsultants.com.
Okay, until next time, everybody, don't be hiding that camera in there in the interview. We'll be right back.
You have been listening to Inside the Mind of Hiring with me, Dr. Mickey Fineberg. Tune in the first and third Tuesday at 11 on Transformation Talk Radio to discover the psychology of making successful hiring decisions. In each episode, hiring managers and HR pros will learn how to leverage assessments and other key screening sources and avoid common pitfalls. Job seekers will gain insight into successfully presenting themselves. For more information on assessing people for mission-critical jobs and on career assessment and coaching, visit DeltaConsultants.com and my LinkedIn profile. If you'd like to write me personally, it's Mickey, Mickey, @deltaconsultants.com.